Today's daf, we're going to be learning a Sanhedrin daf and Chet. I'll just remind everyone, I mentioned at least once before that Rabbanit Hannah Dreyfus is starting a Shiur for us in Hebrew this week on Wednesday. So if you'd like to join, it's Sot Seder B'Sugyot, our Sidra of learning Sugyot La'omek in depth and also learning how to learn skills, how to learn Gemara. So it's a course that's offered in Hebrew right now. If you'd like to join, you can find it on our Hebrew side of our website, and we hope to see you there. And I can already announce I'll be coming to New York City at the end of this month. I'll be there for the last weekend in February speaking in KJ. So if anyone's interested in details, we'll send them out or you can ask us and hope to see people there. Okay, let's get started. So we started with our sugya, which we're going to deal with most of today. Itmar from the bottom of Mem Zayin Amud Bet, about 10 lines from the bottom. Ha'oreg beged lemed. Somebody embroiders a shroud for a dead person. With this dead person in mind, this dead person in front of us, they start embroidering this clothing, the shrouds, and then they realize they don't need it, so they want to use it for someone else. The question is, since it was designated for that dead person, is it already forbidden to benefit from? Things that are meant for dead people, right? Designated for dead people, used for dead people are forbidden. What about just designating? Is that the issue? So it could be weave. Yeah, it could be embroider. Preparing right, I guess it could be weaving. In modern Hebrew, oreg is usually to embroider, but yeah, weaving sounds good too. So they're weaving this beged for the dead body. Abaye says it's forbidden to use for anyone else. And Rava says it's permitted. So now we're going to see what the way the sugya is going to work. I'll explain it because the structure is very easy. The content's going to be much more complicated. So let's just get the structure first. That helps if you break it down. The first thing we're going to do is what's Rava's source, what's Abaye's source. Then we're going to say why doesn't each one go with the other? Okay, and their approach. They're both going to use the Gezerah Shava, but they're going to learn Gezerah Shava from a different place. Okay, one's going to learn it from one, one's going to learn from the other. Why did one learn it from there and not the other way? Okay, we're going to go through that. Then we're going to have 8 sources, which is going to take us to the end, to like the middle of Amud Bet, which are going to be each, okay, we're going to have 3, in the end, 4 to prove to go against Rava, 4 to go against Abaye. You could say, go against, but prove. Okay, so 4 to prove Rava, 4 to prove Abaye, 4 to go against Rava, 4 to go against Abaye. Either which way you look at it, the ones against Rava are support Abaye. And we're going to basically, but it's going to be 3, 3, 1, 1. Okay, it's going to be 3 against Rava, 3 against Abaye, 1 against Rava, 1 against Abaye. When we get to the end, and I don't know if you'll remember this when we get there, but when we get to the end, the last one, we really are not going to have a resolution. This tannaitic sorts, all the others we're going to resolve, how we can understand them both ways. The last one, we're not going to be able to resolve fully according to Abaye, but we are going to say, we won't be able to resolve it really at all. In the end, though, they're going to say, oh, but you know what? This whole topic is a tannaitic debate. So the fact that this tannaitic source doesn't fit with Abaye doesn't bother us because Abaye must hold by the other Tana. And this source holds by the one who holds against Abaye, like Rava. And that's how we're going to end it. And then we're actually going to have who do we hold like? Okay, that's going to be the majority of today's stuff. But because we're going to quote a lot of tannaitic sources and get into all sorts of other topics, each topic is going to be a world in of itself. We're going to have to understand them. Some are simpler, some are a little more complicated. So with that, let's get started. Rava Amal Mutal Hazman Alav Miltahi. I wanted to read from here. My time at Abaye. Okay, so what's the reason for Abaye? That's where we left off yesterday. Why does Abaye say that by designating something, it already makes it forbidden to benefit from? And again, we're talking specifically about designating something for the dead, but we're going to use all sorts of other cases where something is forbidden to benefit from. And does Hazmana mean something or not? So Abaye thinks Hazmana is specifically something for a dead body. My taima to Abaye. What's his reason? Gamar sham egla rufa. Ma egla rufa bazmana mitasra. Hainami bazmana mitasra. Well, egla rufa, it also says afru shamata egla. They do the arifat, they break the neck of the heifer there. So why is it says sham? By Miriam, when she's buried, it says she vatamat sham, and then it says vatika ve'el sham. And it says she's buried there, so they understand the sham gzera shava because it says by egla rufa. Now, egla rufa, we learn in Kiddushin. I'm not going to go all the way back there, but we learn in Kiddushin that once you designate this egla and you bring it down to this nachal eitan, that's where you do by a certain type of nachal stream, that's where you do the egla rufa ceremony. But when you bring it down there, it's already sanctified, and egla rufa is a sorah b'hana'ah. So by just bringing it there before you do anything to the eglah, it's already designated. You can't remove the designation, can't use it for anything else. It's forbidden to benefit from. Likewise, by burial. Okay, now we're going to see the other side. Rava Gamar Sham Sham Avodah Zarah. He learns it by Avodah Zarah. And specifically, we seem to be talking about things that serve Avodah Zarah, like you take an animal to sacrifice to idols, and then you don't sacrifice it. There's nothing, okay? It's not something that was designated for Avodah Zarah. Usually, if I use something for Avodah Zarah purposes, okay, any item, it doesn't have to be an animal sacrificed, it could be anything that was serving the idol. Once I use it, it's forbidden to benefit from. But if I just designate it, it's nothing. We don't view that as anything. And because the pasuk there says you have to abed tabdum. Remember, we saw the pasuk you have to destroy, wipe out all the idols. Okay, it says the mikomot asher avdu sham, where they worship them there. They learn sham there. Okay, that's Rabba's sham avodah zarah. Ma avodah zarah bahazmana. There, just designating it lo mitasra, it doesn't become forbidden. Afachanami, likewise here, bahazmana lo mitasra, it's not forbidden. Rava, my time alogomra me egla rufa. So now we have to go to why. Okay, so each one learns Xera Shava from the burial of Miriam, and learns either from egla rufa that hazmana count is something, or from avodah zarah that hazmana doesn't count. So now the question is, why didn't Rava learn from egla rufa? Amar lecha. So he said, I'd rather learn things that are similar to each other. Mishamshim mishamshim gamrinan. The avodah zarah is things that serve the worship of the idol. That's what we were discussing. Here we have things that serve the person who's being buried. It's the same idea. Lafuke egla rufa dihi gufa kedosha. But the egla rufa itself is not serving anything. The egla rufa is in itself sanctified. And that's a different story. That you could say the item once designated is sanctified. These are just serving something else, so they might not be, with designation alone, might not really count. And that's rough. Abaye, my time Avodah Zarah. Now we have to do the flip. Why didn't Abaye learn it from Avodah Zarah? Amar lecha, midi de orche mi midi de orche gamrinan. Why would I want to learn? So let's just go like this. Why would I want to learn something from Avodah Zarah, which is forbidden, right? La fuke Avodah Zarah de lav orcha. That's not the normal way to do things. You're not supposed to serve idols. I'd rather learn I'd rather learn burial, which is a ceremony you're supposed to do, from an egla rufa, which is a ceremony you're supposed to do. Again, you might not want to get there because it means someone killed someone and we don't know who and all that. But once you have a commandment to fulfill this mitzvah of egla rufa in the event that you need to. So I'd rather learn from something that you're supposed to do rather than avodah zarah, which you're not supposed to do. Why would I want to learn something from it? And again, it's not just why would I want to learn, but that makes they each go with, these two are more similar than the third. It's just a matter of which perspective you look at in terms of finding similarities. So each one found similarities in a different way. Okay, now we have a siman. Usually I kind of just, in Daf Yomi, we don't really have time to deal with these simanim, but today I just wanted to point out something, even though we don't have a lot of time today either, but this siman indicates, now I already told you how many cases are we going to have? You remember? 8. Okay? Now, the siman theoretically should be 8, right? Because it's a siman for each of the cases. Kippah, nafshe, dechatziva, nechisa, deumna. Okay, it has 5. And it's actually numbers 1, 2, and 3, 7, and 8. And it doesn't have the rest. So it's a little bit of a question. First of all, 1, 2, 3, and 7 are the 4 against Rava. And then there's 1 against Abaye, which is the last one. It skips 4, 5, and 6, which are the 3 that are against Abaye. Why, I don't know. It's very possible that the sugya first had only 5, and only later they added those other ones of Abaye. It's possible. It's possible this has to do something with the editing of this sugya, that at some earlier point it only had 5, and at some later point they added 3 more. That was the only point I wanted to maybe add. It's just interesting that it's missing. Some people add 3. There's like a foot. I have a little aleph. I don't know in your Gemara what you have, but there's a little thing that goes to what's called the Hagahot and Siyunim, which are notes added, and they add the 3 more. Anyway, I thought it was just interesting to point out. But let's get to the content because we have a lot. Meitive. So the first one, as I said, the first 3 are against Rava. Which again, Rava said, Hazmana doesn't count for anything. Unless you use it, doesn't work. Soon by the end of this first one, we're going to understand Rava a little bit differently. Kippashu tamei midras. Okay, we're going to have to learn a few extra things here. This is why it's a little complicated. Kippah, they say is a scarf. We have a scarf that's tamei midras. What does tamei midras mean? Okay, this brings us to the world of Zav, Anida. If they sit on something, it like if there's something that you could put like as a blanket, let's say on a couch or a cover on a couch, and they sit on it, something used for sitting that you sit on becomes tamei midras. Okay, and specifically, there's people only like a zav, zava, nida have carried tuma in that way. Okay, a regular other person wouldn't. The object itself becomes an avatuma. It becomes tamei like the person who sat on it. It's a very high level impurity. And then you took this item, this scarf. Now, you might know, like Sephardi Sifrei Torah, they use scarves on the Sifrei Torah. I don't know if that's what they mean here, but nitanato sefer. Well, now, this is the tricky part. Nitanto means you designated it now to be used to cover a Sefer Torah. Now, what happens? As soon as you use this item to cover it, to use a Sefer Torah, no one is ever going to sit on it again, right? You wouldn't take a scarf that was on a Sefer Torah and sit on it, which means that even if it's actually Tamei Midras already, it now is no longer Tamei. The Midras Tuma leaves it because you switched its use. Okay, now notice how you switched its use. Just by thinking, I'm going to use this for a Sefer Torah. Okay? That already proves Abaye because Hazmana Milta. If Hazmana wasn't Milta, then you wouldn't be able to do this. Tahor, now, something else. So Tahor Min Midras, that's what they tell you. It's no longer Tamei Midras, okay, because it changed, right? The Avatuma of Midras can only be something that actually could be sat on. And since it can't be sat on anymore, it not only will it not become Tamei if someone sits on it later, but like who's a Zav or a Zava, but it also loses its Tuma that it had, but not completely. It's no longer an avatuma, but this is a kind of weird thing, although this totally is not connected, so don't worry if you don't exactly understand this, but aval tamei magamidras. It's tamei like a rishon. A rishon is what happens when an avatuma touches something, it becomes tamei. So this item basically touched itself. So it was midras. As it turned from something potentially could be midras to not, it kind of touched itself. So now it's a rishon. So it is tamei. It's just not an avatum, right? It's just a rishon. A rishon can only be mitame. I'll give you one of the relevances. It's a rishon that it can only be mitame food and drink. Can't be mitame another item like itself. Whereas the avatuma can be mitame vessels and people and all that. So it's a big difference. But anyway, it has a different level of tuma. That's not important. What's important is nitanato means, even though it sounds like it seems you put it on the Sefer Torah, the way they understand nitanato is you intended for it to be used for a Sefer Torah. Intention alone seems to work. To which they answer for Rava, ema nitanato ukarachto. So change it. It means you intended and you put it around the Sefer Torah. Lama li nitanato ukarachto. Wait a minute. If you're going to say that according to Rava, all you need is to put it on the Sefer Torah, you don't also need to have thought about that you want to put it on the Torah and put it on the Torah, right? At least that's what we thought. We thought Abaye needs, right, thinks Hazman is enough to make it already sanctified or designated, right, and forbidden to benefit. Rava said you just have to do it, right? Hazmana doesn't count. Well, now we're going to learn that Hazmana sort of counts, and we're going to see how. Kiddur Rav Chisda, and that is, why would the case be also you intended to use it for the Sefer Torah and you covered it for the Sefer Torah? Why would you need both? Well, Kiddur Rav Chisda, as Rav Chisda says. Now, Rava, by the way, studied with Rav Chisda, so it makes sense that he be going in his path. To Amar Rav Chisda, Haisu dara da azmine lemetzar beit tefillin, vitzar beit tefillin. Here's a very similar case. You took a cloth and you decided, I'm going to use this to wrap my tefillin. And then you did wrap your tefillin in them. Asur lemetzar beit pshite. You can't take that cover now and wrap your money in it because you designated it and you used it. What if azmane velo tzarbe? What if you designated it but didn't decide to use it? Okay, remember, this is Rav Chisda and Rava goes like Rav Chisda. So we already know designation doesn't count. So if you designated it to cover your tefillin and then you decide I want to use it for my money, of course you could do that. What if, but here's the chiddush, tzarbe velo azmane. If you wrapped it around the tefillin, but you didn't think before I'm going to do this, you just saw your tefillin wasn't covered, you saw there was a cloth nearby, you covered it with your tefillin, you covered it, you used it to cover your tefillin, share lemetzar pshite. You're allowed to use this for your coins. Why is that? Well, the reason is because, think about it. If I say I'm going to use this for my tefillin cover, and then I cover my tefillin with them, that already shows seriousness of purpose. And then it's designated for the tefillin. But if I didn't intend at all, and I just saw the tefillin uncovered and I quickly covered the tefillin, then it just happened. It just like I used it as a cover for that moment, but it doesn't mean that I intended it for the tefillin, and therefore it doesn't actually have that concept that this was designated and therefore can't be used for anything else. So it actually doesn't create any sore. It doesn't create this sanctity to it that I can't use it for anything else if I just did it like on a one-off. The one-off doesn't really mean anything. And that explains, going back now to our Sefer Torah, that if I took this kippah, this scarf that was Tamei Midras, and I just wrapped it around the Torah, that doesn't do anything. I had to have intended to use it for the cover for the Torah and then actually cover the Torah with it. Even according to Rava. In other words, again, it shows that Rava needs hasmana, but hasmana in itself is not enough. You need hasmana and wrapping, and using it. Okay, now, before we get to the second source, we have one more thing, which is what about Abaye? What does Abaye hold about all this? So Abaye de Amar Hasmana Milti. He thinks Hasmana is something. So now we're going to go like this. Azmane, obviously, if you intended to use it for the Sefer Torah or the tefillin, let's go to the tefillin case. Afagav de lo tsarbe, even if you didn't wrap your tefillin in it, you obviously can't use it for money. Tsarbe, what if you just wrapped it? So now we're going to have the two possibilities. What if you wrapped it and you had intention before? Obviously, we know what Abaye is going to say. If you already intended it to be used for the tefillin and then you wrapped your tefillin in it, of course you can't use it for the money. But ilo azmene lo. Abaye agrees with Rava in the case where you used it without having intended anything, right? You just all of a sudden said, oh, I need a cover. Let me quickly cover it with this. If you didn't have hasmana, it doesn't count. So he agrees with Rava about that one case. They disagree if there's only hasmana. Moving on to source 2. Difficulty against Rava. Tashma, let's learn from here. Nefesh shebina'o l'shem chai mutar bahana. If you put up some sort of, I don't know if it's like our gravestones, okay, but you have some sort of matzeva, they call it, Rashi says, some sort of stone structure that you designated for a person who's still alive, okay? Now, we talked about yesterday, I want to correct something. I talked about yesterday about sometimes the Chaver Kadisha, if you order a grave, right, and you say, I want this for me, and then you want to move it to somebody else, or you order it for someone and you decide to use it for someone else, they give you problems with it. It's not a halachic issue, it seems, because the halachic issue, number one, we learned if it's in the ground, there's no Isser Hana. And also, we're going to talk about today a lot, if it was designated for someone who's alive, that's not considered designation. It has to be like Oreg Beged Lemeit. That was our case. The person's already dead. Only if it was intended for a dead person are we going to start with these issues that it's forbidden for anyone else to benefit from. So the fact that Chaver Kadishas do this is sometimes just a monetary thing. Like they want people to commit and they want a final commitment and they don't want to allow you to start switching because it's a headache, not in their best interest, we could say. Okay, but now you have a stone that you established for someone who's alive, mutar bahana. So of course you could benefit from it because it wasn't designated for a dead person. Even though it was designated for when the person dies, but they weren't dead yet. Hosif bodimus echad l'shemei. But if you added, it's hard to understand the reality here, but you added a row of stones to it, right? Maybe you built up a thing and then you wanted to add one more row at the top or something. Asur bahana. At that point, you can't benefit from it anymore because you added the stones for the intent of the dead person. Now, what do you see here? Intention enough alone is enough because you didn't use it yet for the dead person. So again, how are we going to answer this according to Rava? It must be you already put the dead body there, okay? We're talking about this was, it was by a grave and you put the stone up for the dead person. But then it doesn't make any sense because we're going to do this a lot to the sources. We're going to say you want to answer it that way, but look at the source more carefully or look at something else we said about this source. So in this case, we're going to say it says, if you added the row of stones, it's a problem. But if you put the dead body in there and used this structure for the dead body, this monument for the dead body, it's for the dead person, it shouldn't matter whether you added a row of stones for them. Even if you didn't add a row of stones for them, it would be a problem. So, lo tzricha afagav depanya. What they want to tell you is like this. If you added this row of stones specifically for the dead person, used it for the dead person, and then removed the body, then it's forbidden because the row of stones was designated for this dead body and this dead person, and therefore you can't use it for anyone else. But if it didn't have the row of stones and you use the monument for this dead person, and then you decided to take the dead person away from there and you wanted to use it for someone else, it's fine because the whole thing wasn't really designated for the dead person from the beginning. And that would be a way to explain it according to Rava. And just to add another point to this, Amar Rav from Bar Papa, Amar Rav Chisda, Im haya mikiro chotzo umutar. Okay, so now he says, if you, just one second, right. If you recognize which row was added specifically for this dead person, this is just an added thing. This has nothing to do with our whole issue. If you recognize the row was added, which row of stones in this monument was dedicated for this dead person, you could actually chotzo mutar. If, let's say, you made this monument for a regular, for a person who was alive, or for no one in specifically, you had it ready. You added a row specifically for this dead person, and you buried the dead person there with the monument. Then you remove the dead body. We said, because you made that row, it's too late. But if you know which row it is and you can take the row out, then you can actually use it for somebody else. That's just a side. Okay, source 3. Hachotzev tashma. Let's learn from here. Hachotzev kever la'aviv. We saw this yesterday. Va'alach ukvaro b'kever acher. You dig a grave for your father, and then you go and bury him somewhere else. Hareze lo yikaver ba'olamit. You can't be buried there. Okay, you designate this for your father. You're not allowed to be buried in that spot. So what do you see? Hazmana is milta. You never put your father there. Why would it be forbidden? So what's Rava going to say? Rava could say, Hata mishum kvod aviv. Maybe this is just because it's not respectful for your father. You dug this grave for your father. You can't then use it for yourself. And we're going to further prove this. Hachinami mistabra de katani sefer. We're going to further prove this from the end of that source. Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel omer, Afa chotzev avanim la'aviv, halachu kvora b'makom acher, hareze lo yikaver behen olamit. It says, even if you quarry stones, so you take stones from a quarry, you quarry them out of the rock, you now have these stones, and you decide you were going to build a grave, a burial plot with those stones, but then you don't. You don't build the burial plot with the stones. You can't use those stones ever again. Now, right, for yourself. You can't use those stones for your own grave. Lo yikaver behen olamit. So now what did I do? I quarried the stones from a quarry, but I didn't build anything yet. So comes the Gemara and they make a good comparison. What was our case? Ha'oreg beged. You weave a garment. Now, if this is all because of kvod aviv, which was the way we answered the question in the first place, resolve the difficulty for Rabba, then this all works well. But if you said it's because you designated them, and the designation is an issue, nobody said if I spun the threads in order to make the garment, nobody said the spinning of the thread is going to already give sanctity to this. And the quarrying the stones is parallel, analogous to the weaving, spinning the threads. We were only talking about the weaving itself. Nobody thinks spinning the threads. That's just the raw materials. It's creating the raw materials for some action. Nobody thinks at that stage it's going to already be sanctified. It can't be, designated. Can't be used for anything else. So therefore, the stones, the only way we could see this would be a problem would be if you say it was just out of respect for the father, which has nothing to do with our topic. Source 4. Tashma, this was the first one against Abaye now. Kever, and again, the next 3 are against Abaye, so you keep that in your head. Kever chadash mutar b'hana'ah. A new grave is permitted to benefit from. Now, we saw this yesterday. Yesterday, we explained we're talking about a grave that wasn't designated for anyone in particular. But Rashi says that at this point, the Gemara thinks we're talking about a new grave that you dug for someone who was dead. Okay, we're going to change it in a minute, but that's permitted. Hitil bo nefel asor b'hana'ah. But only if you put a nefel in it, a stillborn, then it would be forbidden. So now we have, it seems like against Abaye, because it says unless you actually do an action, it's not going to be anything. Hazmana is nothing. So they say, right, hitil in, lo hitil lo. It sounds like it's all dependent on your actions, not on your thoughts, your intentions. So then we say no. Huadin to afagav de lo hitil. Okay, and now Rashi explains a little bit more. Okay, Rashi toward the bottom of the daf says, right, we thought we were talking about a person who is dead, but no, we're actually talking about a kever chadash is you used it, you designated it for someone who is still alive or for no one in particular. You just dug a grave to be ready. And then it kind of transitions into that if you then took this grave and put someone in it, and then it became designated for a dead person, then it would be forbidden to benefit from. And even if it's a nefel, even if it's a stillborn, and that explains why they were talking about a stillborn here. because they're going to tell you, Ula hu adin da'afagav delo itil, right? In other words, this is even if they didn't put it in, Hazmana would count. If you really designated it for a dead person, of course it would be a problem, like Abaye. But what we're talking about here is it was designated for a live person, and then you put in a body. Now, Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel differed, and that's why they were stressing this nifel. He said, "Ein lenefalim tfisat kever." Okay, he says nifalim don't have tfisat kever. So let's say you dedicated this as a grave, but not for anyone in particular. So according to Abaye, either you designate it for someone in particular, and then already it becomes forbidden, or you actually put a body in. Now, what if you put the body of a nefil in? Does that count? Well, that's a machlok at Rashbag and the Tana of our source. The Tana of our source says putting a nefil in is enough, which means if you took the nefil out, then you can't use it for anyone else because it was already designated as a grave for someone in particular, even though it was only a stillborn. And Rashbag would say it doesn't have tfisa olamit. That means it's not forever. So while the nefil is in there, it can't, it's got this forbidden bahana'ah, forbidden to benefit. But if you took the nefil out and you removed it for some reason, then already you'd be able to use it for somebody else because a nefil is not significant enough. Okay, and that's the machloka between them, but our source, we brought things. Yes. Anyway, this doesn't prove, you can explain this according to Abaye as well. So we now explained it differently than we thought. Kamash Malan, and that's what it comes to teach you, that it disagrees with Rashbag. Source number 5, again, neged Abaye. Tashma, motal hametim lemetim. This is very interesting. You collect charity for dead people. And then you don't need, right? So now you used it for this dead person, okay, or used it for another dead person. So whatever's left in the charity box needs to be only used for dead people because it was designated for that. Motal hamet liyorshav. But if you designate it for one person in particular who needed money for his burial, and then you had leftover money, what do you do with that leftover money? Well, let's go through. Hazmana milta, what would you say? It would only be able to go to that dead person. That's his designation. That's Abaye. But if you say like Rava, it could go to the heirs. And that's what it says here. So that seems like Rava. To which they answer, say, no, it's talking about when you collected the money when the person was still alive. Then remember, as long as the person's alive, it's not hasmana for a dead person. So that's why it would work, according to Abaye. But the Gemara doesn't like this answer because they say, halo tannaitic, but that's not what it says. Now we're going to read. Ditnan, the Mishnah says, this is a Mishnah, mutar metim lemetim, mutar met liyorshav. That's our Mishnah we just read. Tane Allah, but there's a Braita that explains it even better, and it says, Ketzad. What does this mean? Gavu lemetim stam zeu mutar metim lemetim. Okay, that's what we said. It was money collected, right? We have a charity box in our community for helping bury people who don't have money. Okay, that's going to go obviously only to dead people. Gavu lemeit zeh, now here you have it. They collected specifically for this dead person, meaning it was collected specifically for the person when the person was dead, not alive. So there goes that answer. Okay, but let's keep reading. Zehu motar met liyorshav. That's the case. But now the Gemara springs back with a different question. According to what you're saying, and this is to answer the question with another question. Look at the end of that Mishnah. Ema Seifa, Rabbi Meir omer lo yiga behen ad shiavo Eliyahu. Rabbi Meir says, you can't touch that money forever. You have to leave it till Eliyahu comes and clarifies whose money this is. Rabbi Natan omer yasedimus al kivro ziluf lifnei mitato. You want to say the source doesn't follow Abaye? But look at Rabbi Natan says the only thing you could do with it is use it for the dead body. Meaning, this seems to hold like Abaye. You're trying to bring this source against Abaye from Tanakama, but I could go against Rava from Rabbi Natan, and Rabbi Meir is sort of in the middle here. So Rabbi Natan says you can only use this money to add. So we already buried the person, but we have leftover money. So what do? We add another row of stones, or we pour like a wine thing they would pour to have a nicer smell over there. So they could pour wine over it. Okay. So now we have a source that seems to say, something Hazmana Milta, something Hazmana Lab Milta. How is each one going to explain this? Well, they're going to come and explain this actually has nothing to do with Hazmana, or not enough to do with Hazmana. Abaye mitaretz l'tameh, but Rava mitaretz l'tameh. Abaye is going to explain it in his way, and Rava is going to explain it to fit with him. And let's see. Abaye mitaretz l'tameh, dekule alma Hazmana Milta. He's going to say they all think Hazmana counts, but what's the issue here? Tanakama savar dechazi le tafis de lo chazi le lo tafis. Tanakama says like this. If you raise, I don't know, $10,000 for this dead body to bury the dead body, and then all you need is $8,000. So the 8,000 is where Hazmana went to. Hazmana doesn't go to the extra 2,000. When you collect money for charity, the intention here only applies to the money that actually was needed, not the money that wasn't needed. It's a fascinating concept. That's Tanakam. Rabbi Meir, Masapgali, Tafasilotas. Rabbi Meir is in the middle. He doesn't know. Does it count or does it not count for the whole thing? And that's why Hilkach, that's why he says, Lo Yigaben, Achub Eliyahu, wait till Eliyahu comes. Rabbi Natan, Pshitale, Divadai Tafis. And Rabbi Natan's obviously on the other side, who says, no, you collected the money for the dead person. Hazmana goes to everything, even though you don't need all of it. Okay. Hilkach, Yasel, Dimus al Kivro, and therefore you can only use it for the dead body. Rava mitaretz l'tameh. So Rava explains things in a different way. Dekule alma hazmana lav milti. Nobody thinks hazmana counts. But what? Tanakama savar ki bazule. Now, what's the issue here? This person obviously has yorshim. He has heirs. But what did he do? He had to collect money for charity. Now, when he was willing, now it's humiliating to have to collect money from charity. So when he was willing to humiliate himself, and this Rashi says when he was still alive, he was willing to accept this money for when he dies. When he was willing to do that, he basically, the question is he willing to embarrass himself only for his own sake or also for his children to benefit? So, or his heirs. So, Rava says the Tanakama holds, ki bazule achule machil zilute gabe yorshim. When he was willing to humiliate himself, he was willing to humiliate himself and then say, yeah, and some of this can go to my children as well. Rabbi Meir masapkale imachili lo machil. Rabbi Meir is not sure if he's willing to do that or not. Hilkach lo yigabehen, and therefore the money remains untouched till Eliyahu comes. And Rabbi Natan pshita le de lo machil. Rabbi Natan says, of course he wouldn't be willing to humiliate himself so that the money goes to his children. He was only willing to humiliate himself for the money for his own sake. And therefore, Hilkach yasedimus al kivro zilufim b'nei mitato. He was only willing to do it for his own sake, so therefore the money's all designated only to him. And then this doesn't really have to do with Hazmana Milta or not Milta, and therefore we're moving on. Tashma, source number 6. This is an interesting situation. Child dies. The parents are very distraught. One of the things they might do as a result is they might just throw all sorts of clothing into the grave because they know that once it goes in the grave, it'll be forbidden b'hana'ah. It's sort of a reaction of, I don't care about anything in life, and I just, I'm just giving up on all my money. Nothing matters to me anymore. I'm so upset that my child is dead. And they throw all their clothes in. It's a mitzvah for other people to take it out and say, you were not forbidding all your money. Get a grip, right? This is not a good situation. This is not a good thing to do. You're just digging yourself into a big hole. And we do that. We take it out. What do you see? They designated it to be forbidden, and yet we can undo it. So it shows Hazman alav milta, like Rava. So they say, turning out I'm a bad, hata mishumura raihu. No. They didn't really mean what they were doing. They were just very distraught. And because they were so sad, they did this, but they didn't have what we learned a lot in the Babas, gemirut dad. They didn't really mean it. It's like asmachta almost. They didn't really intend for this. And therefore, it's not a real hazmana. So the Gemara says, that sounds very nice. But it says on that source, again, we keep bringing in, you want to explain the source that way, but it says about this source something else which doesn't seem to make your story work. Amaram Shim ben Gamliel b'med dvarim amurim shelo nagu b'mita. That's all if it didn't touch the bed. But if it touched the bed, presumably where the dead body is, then it's forbidden. So it sounds like they did have Hazmana does work, it sounds like if it touched the bed, right, then you did this action, it would be a problem. So what do we say? So it doesn't sound like, if some of it works, then you can't just say, oh, we're not really taking the parents seriously. So they say no. That is for a side reason. Tirgama ula b'mitanig beritimo. We're talking about it touch the bed that's going to be buried with the coffin. If people see people taking out things that came in contact with the coffin, people are going to think that they're burial shrouds, and they're going to think that we could take burial shrouds that were designated for this person and use them. And then they're going to make mistakes in other situations. That's why they make this distinction. They start throwing things in the grave, you could take them out. But if they touch the bed, no, because that's going to cause people to misinterpret halacha later on. Okay, and therefore we've explained this. Source number 7. Now we're back to against Rav. Okay, this is kind of similar to something we saw. We have a wallet meant, or some sort of bag, a satchel to put tefillin into. You can't put money in it. That sounds like Abaye, Hazman Milta. Hiniach bo tefillin, yaniach bo ma'ot. But if you did a one-off and you just put the tefillin in the bag, then later you can put money in it. So they answer, Kid Rav Chisda. Well, you can explain this according to Rava, like Rav Chisda, which meant, right, you need Hazmana, right? Hazmana also works. So, right. Sorry, what did I say? Did I skip a line? I think I skipped a line. Yeah, I skipped a line. Asa ovihiniach bo tefillin, asur laniach bo ma'okid Rav Chisda. You have to read it as you created it and as you did it for tefillin and you put the tefillin in. And then once you explain it that way, that's exactly what Rav Chisda said, which we explain Rava is going with that you need both. Right? Without Hazmana, it doesn't work. It's not that Hazmana alone works. We're basically changing. It's not Hazmana alone, it's Hazmana and you used it. Okay, next. Tashma, last source against Abaye, which in the end is going to knock out Abaye. Amar le'umana, seli tik shel sefer, oner tik shel tefillin. Ad shelo nishtamesh behem kodesh, mutar lishtamesh behem chol. So you hire someone to make you a sefer Torah cover or a tefillin bag. Until you use them, until you start using them, you can use them for something else, for any purpose, even chol, non-sacred. Nishtamesh behem kodesh, only once you use them, asur lishtamesh behem chol. Okay, that's very clearly Rava. You cannot explain that according to Abaye, so we're stuck. But like I said, we're not stuck because the Gemara says, tannaitic. Don't worry that this tannaitic source contradicts Abaye, because Abaye holds by a different side of a machloka tanaim, which means that you could just say this source is by the Tana that holds like Rava, and Abaye holds like other tanaim, and that's okay then. You can have a contradiction from a tannaitic source if basically, you can, this is a good sugya to understand methodology. Amoraim cannot disagree with tannaitic sources. So what do? We have tannaitic sources that don't work, and that's what we did according to this entire sugya. We basically explain them in a way, we interpret them a little, maybe not the pshat, in order to make it work. But when you can't do that, the only other way to do it is to say he holds like some other Tana. And that's what we're doing. And it's a little bit of a different topic. And you have to think about it a little more in depth. If we were going in depth, I would think about this more. Is this really the same idea? But we're going to go with it. To Tanya, it says in a Braita, now we're talking about covering your tefillin. Like your tefillin boxes tefillin boxes are made of the skin of a behema, who's a kosher animal. What if tzipan zahav, if you covered them with gold, which you're not allowed to do, or tala lehem or shabeimat me'ah, or they had a hole and you patched it up with non-kosher animal's leather, the skin, psulo, they're disqualified. Or behemat kshera, but the or of a kosher animal would be good. Af al pisha, okay, that's obvious, but comes and says, af al pisha lo ibdan lishman, even though it wasn't prepared for the sake of tefillin. So now we're basically saying it's not really the same idea, but what this is saying in simple terms is you don't need hazmana really. It doesn't need to be intended specifically for tefillin for it to be considered for the tefillin, for it to be kosher. So this shows hazmana is not so important. That's really what they're trying to say, and that would be Rava. Rabban Shimon Gamliel, or beimat Torah psulot, even kosher animal hide is disqualified ad shiabdo lishman. It has to be designated, thought of that you're preparing the leather for the cover for the sake of the tefillin. So that shows hazmana is important. Okay, it's not really the same thing, but is hazmana important or not important? And that would be the same thing by us. Now we have two small things to finish up in the sugya before we move on. Amarle Ravina LeRava. Now the whole question was about, remember, Rava and Abaye are having this debate. Ravina goes to Rava and says, I don't understand. You're having a debate about someone who weaves a beged, a garment, shrouds, for a dead body. Comes Ravina and says, what kind of a reality are you talking about? Mi geduchte derami bemeit va'argi beged lebeit. Remember, the whole thing is it has to be for a dead body, not that if you make shrouds for people when they're still alive and then you use them later, that's obviously not an issue. It wasn't designated for a dead body. So what kind of crazy situation do you have the bodies lying there and you start making the clothing that you're going to... We always have piles of clothing ready to go. So he says, great answer, Amar Le'in, Kigan Shachve de Harpanya. The people who die in Harpanya, it's such a poor town that they actually can't do that. When someone dies, they collect charity, they get the money, they make the clothing, and then they do it like this, and therefore there is a situation where this would be relevant. But after having a whole page and a half discussion about this, Ravina is basically saying it's a ridiculous conversation because it's so irrelevant that this would ever happen. Derish Meramer, Hilchata Kavateda Abaye, which is interesting in of itself because we hold like Abaye only Ya'al Kagam, and this is not one of the six. But this shows maybe that in Meramer's time, they hadn't yet decided all that. Rabbanan Amra Hilchata Kavateda Rava. The rabbis say we hold like Rava and Hilchata Kavateda Rava. And like not as a surprise, we hold like Rava. Okay, now we're going on to a new topic. Tanu Rabbanan, Harugei Malchut Nichsehen Lemelech. Harugei Beitin Nichsehem Liyorshim. Let's start with the last one. If you're killed by the court, your kids inherit your property, okay? Your heirs. But if you're killed by the Malchut, which most commentaries think we mean Malchi Israel, okay, you rebel against the king, and they kill you, your property goes to the king. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Af Harugei Malchut Nichsehem Liyorshim. Rabbi Yehuda says, even Harugei Malchut, their property goes to their heirs. So we have this big machloket, and what are we going to use to try to clarify? Tanakh stories of people who are morei b'malchut. Number one, we have Navot. If you remember in Kerem Navot, Izebel sets up this whole thing because Achav wanted the Kerem, and they claim, he wasn't really, but they claim that Navot was a morei b'malchut. And then we're going to go to Yoav, who is the Sartzava of David, who at the end of David's life, he goes with Adoniyahu, and then Shlomo goes to kill him, and Yoav runs away, and he goes to the Mizbeach, the altar, to protect himself from getting killed. So we're going to use both those stories as our trying to figure out who's right. So Amrula the Rabbi Yehuda, Halok Var Nemar, how could you say it goes to the heirs? It says, Hine bekerem navoda she'arad sham levishto. After Achav kills, or Izebel gets, Navot killed, he goes down lirishto. What does lirishto mean? To inherit it, because he gets it because Navot, according to their fake trial, was rebelled against the king. Amar lahen, so Rabbi Yehuda answers them. Ben he was his cousin. They were first cousins, and therefore he inherited it once Navot died. So they say, hello, Arbe Banima Yulo, but he had sons. Remember, sons go before cousins. Otovet banav harag. They say, what do you mean? He killed him and his sons, as it says in the pasuk. Im lo etmei navov etmei banav re'iti. This is way farther along in the beginning of Malachim Bet. Okay, that story happened earlier in Malachim, but it says when they go to punish his children get their punishment. It says you're getting paid back. The prophet says to him, you're getting paid back for the fact that you killed Navot's sons. So therefore, he must have killed his sons, and that's why Achav was next in line, and therefore you could prove it's the heirs and not the king. The Rabbanan, the rabbis say no, he had sons. Achav got it because Navot was Yorei b'malchut. He was morei b'malchut. He was rebelled against the king. What about the sons dying? What it meant was that when you killed Navot, you killed all the potential future sons he would have had. Now we're moving on to another point in the story. If you say it goes to the king, Hainu dichtiv berach Navot Elohim v'melech. It said they accused Navot of cursing God and cursing the king. Now, why would it matter to curse the king? If he curses God, he gets killed, and then Achav will inherit anyway. He's an heir. If you say it goes to the heirs, he didn't need to say he rebelled against the king. It must be he rebelled against the king in order that the king get his property. To which the Gemara counters with a question and says, what do you mean? Well, then you don't need to say he cursed God. Okay, because if he curses the king gets his property. You don't need then, why do you also curse God? Ella, remember, he didn't curse God. This was all just a fake trial. Ella, the reason why it said he also cursed God was lafushe ritcha. It was just to get the Dayanim angrier and say, wow, this is a really terrible person. Hachanami lafushe ritcha. So you could say either the Gav is extra to get him angry, or the fact that he rebelled against the king was extra, and it doesn't indicate anything about this machloket. Now we're going to go to Yoav. The king gets it. Now, why was he trying to avoid getting killed by Shlomo? Because if he got killed by Shlomo, his property would go to the king. If he ends up just dying in the altar from starvation, right, by standing in the altar all day and eventually he'll die, well, that means his heirs will get it because he didn't die by the king. So, and he says, what does he say? Shlomo sends Benayahu, who's the Kohen, to go to get him out. And he says to Benayahu, no, I'm not going anywhere. And Elamanda, right? Why would it matter? Why would he stay there? So the Gemara answers, what do you mean, why would he stay there? He wanted to live a little bit longer. He figures, if I stay here, I'll buy myself time. Okay? So that doesn't prove anything. Okay, that's done with, we brought Achav and Navot, and we brought Yoav to try to prove. We can't prove it. Now we're going to end with this last part about Benayahu. go back to this line that we said, and we're going off on a tangent here. After he goes and Yoav says, I'm not moving anywhere, but now goes back to the king and he says to him, this is what Yoav said, and this is what he answered me. Now, the assumption is it sounds like Yoav had a lot to say, but he didn't. All he said was that one line. So what the Midrash does is it adds a whole conversation that must have happened. Amarle. He said, Yoav said, Zil Emale, go back and tell the king, Tarte lo ta'ave b'hai gavra. You can't do to me two things. Now, what happened? David had cursed Yoav. And then Shlomo wants to kill him. And Yoav says, you can't curse me and kill me. So, and we'll see in a minute what the curse was. He says, Ikatale, kabelitate, litavate, delati avuch. If you kill me, then the curse your father gave to me is going to boomerang onto you. In other words, someone's got to get that curse. You can't give me two things. So if you kill me, you get the curse. Elo, if you don't kill me, shavke deleku beletavte delatu avuch. If you don't kill me, then I'll get the curse. In other words, I'm only going to get one. And if the curse has nowhere else to go, it's going to go on to you. Vayomalo Amelech. Now we go back to the psukim because that was not in the psukim. Vayomalo Amelech hasei kasher dibel. Do like he said. And which choice did he choose? Pagabo ukfarto. And they killed him and they buried him. So now what happens? According to what Yoav said, the curse is supposed to go on to Shlomo. Well, Amar Rav Yehuda Amarav, Kol Klalot Shekilal Davidic Yoav Nitkaimu B'Sarosh Shel David. All the future generations of David's family, you see all the curses that he said to Yoav, and in fact, that's what happens. So let's go through very quickly. What he said was, this was the curse, Al Yikaret Mi Beit Yoav, there will always be in the house of Yoav, Zav, Mitzora, a leper, Machzik Bepelech, someone who can't walk except with a cane, Nofel Becherev, people who will be killed by the sword, V'chasar Lechem, and people who look for food, don't have food. Zav Me Rechavam, this is the weirdest one, I would say. Rechavam becomes a Zav. How do we know this? Well, Rechavam, if you remember, takes the advice of his advisors and decides to up the taxes. When the people are complaining, lower the taxes. It's too much for us, which Shlomo did. Don't do so much. He decides to do more, and then the people get very angry, and he has to run away. So he runs away. Amelech Rechavam hitametz la'alot b'merkava l'nus liYerushalayim. He goes on the Merkava to run to Yerushalayim. Now, we started our daf with this thing about the Zav. The Zav has too much Merkav. We called it Midrash before, but it's also too much Merkav. So they say, why did it say Merkava? Not because he was a king and king has chariots, but according to the Midrash, Uchtiv kol Merkava she'yirkava lavazav yitma. Everything the Zav sits on, and it uses the word Merkav, must be Gzera Shava here. It must be he became a Zav. So that's the first one. The other ones are more explicit in the verses. Mitzoham Uziyahu dechtivu b'chazkato gavalibo ad lashchit. This is the later king in Uziyahu. These are all kings of Israel, kings of Yehuda from David HaMelech. He ends up becoming bad. What does he do? He acts like a Kohen. Now, he's not a Kohen. He's from Yehuda. And the punishment he got was he got tzara. There you see the leprosy. Machzik bepelach, that you can't walk. Me'asa, dichtiv rakleg, chalat raglav. When he got old, he had a problem with his feet. Amar of Yehuda Amarav shachazo pudagra, which according to the Koran is gout. Amar le marzutra bered Rav Nachman. We're going into like a little aside here. Hechidami, what is this disease? Amar le kemachat b'basar chai. It feels like there's needles in your flesh. Mina yade, they say, how did you know, Rav Nachman? Well, three options. Maybe he had gout. He learned it from his rabbi. That God tells those who fear him his secrets. He had some prophecy about it, which is interesting to say. A chacham had a prophecy and about what gout is. Anyway, a little bit strange. Last one. No, we have two more. Nofel b'cherev mi Yoshiyahu. Dechtiv vayoru amurim lemelech Yoshiyahu. Yoshiyahu gets shot. That's like by the sword through arrows. V'amar of Yehuda Amarav shasu kol gufo kikvara. They made his whole body like a sieve. V'chasar lachem Yechanya. Remember Yehoiachim, we learned about him not so long ago. Dechtiv aruchato aruchat tamid nitnalo. His meal was always given to him because he went into galut early, and then he was given his meal every day because he didn't have food. He was chasar lachem. He had to depend on the king for his food. So all those curses took place, and the sons happened to David because of this deal that we didn't see in the psukim, but according to the Midrash, that was the deal. Okay, what we did today, very quickly, Hazman Milta, Lav Milta. We explained the sources, why each one didn't hold by the other, which Gzera Shava they took, and why. Then we went through the 8 sources that seemed to support, half supporting Rava, half supporting Abaye, and how we explain each one according to the one that didn't seem so intuitive, except for the last one, which basically then say, okay, well, it's a machloket tanaim. And then from there, we got to this other thing about how Rugei Malchuta, their property, go to their heirs. or to the king. And then we had a whole discussion about it, whether we can learn it from Tanakh, either which way. But again, we answered all the questions, so everything can go in either direction. From there, we got off on a bit of a tangent about Yoav. With that, we finished for today. Wishing everyone a good day.